Hi Karthik, thanks for joining.
Hey, hey guys, I'm really sorry. I didn't know that Spaces worked only on the phone, so I had joined through my laptop. So
Not an issue. No,
hence the delay. Sorry to keep all of you waiting.
yeah, we all are excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So
Uh,
thanks for having me here, Vishal. So let me know what you would like me to specifically talk about. Really excited to chat about anything you guys have in mind, and of course to share my journey, possibly that might help other people who are more uh, interested in starting up, interested in startups in general as well. So happy to share all of this and maybe even open up to an AMA.
sure,
So however you think is the right way to.
sure. I'm starting with introduction that you being honest and transparent is how most of us know you. And for those who don't know about you, that you are co-founder of Flexible and Remote Tools. You contributed and share insights in building startup, and also shared your learnings in no code stack. You
Mhm.
actively contributed on product and articles articles on Medium, hash notes, and also threads on Twitter.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I want you to start with a little bit about your childhood, about your education, and
Mhm.
time from your admission in BITS Pilani to graduation.
Mhm. No, sure. See, I think, in the interest of time and also so that people can take something out of this,
Yeah,
listening, I'll share about all of that and also maybe in the context of startups, because I think most of the people who listen to or read what I write
yeah,
is because they're, are associated with startups in some way or the other, right?
yes,
So
yes.
so I studied in BITS Pilani. That's where I did my engineering. I did my engineering in Triple E or electrical and electronics engineering, but I never did anything in that field whatsoever. So immediately after, I joined JP Morgan in the investment banking division. I worked a lot over there on M&A transactions for about 3 years, and a lot of it was just making decks, PowerPoint presentations, making, projections, Excel, a lot of different kinds of valuation and so on. None of which was anything that I learned in BITS Pilani. So it was a entirely new world for me. Uh, it was in that phase, to be very honest, when I graduated out of BITS Pilani, I don't know why, but I felt I wanted to work in finance in in some aspect, and that's where JP Morgan featured. But as I worked more in it, while it was interesting in the beginning, towards the second or the third year, I felt it was quite repetitive.
Mhm.
And when I moved on to a role in London, at that point of time, the number of hours I was putting was about 110 to 120 hours a week. And at that point of time, I really didn't feel it was stimulating enough for me to be putting in so many hours, uh, and the work wasn't that great, right? So that was the time when I decided, okay, maybe it's a good time for me to move on and not look at investment banking as the future career of my life. And it was a tough decision, and I think this will be relevant to a lot of people who might be listening on that. My salary was very good at that point of time, right? And a lot of my friends who were working along with me, my colleagues, were warning me against making a decision of leaving this, because they were like, in 3 or 4 years, you will really regret this, because all your friends or us, basically, they were talking about them, would have
Mhm.
gone much ahead in their career, and they would be earning a lot more than I ever will. And that time I'll feel really sorry for making such a decision. And I think all the doubts I had in terms of whether I should make that decision or not was clear at that moment, because I was clear that benchmarking myself against others can't be the way I live life, right? There has to be a certain absolute nature in which I approach it, and the only way I can sort of approach it is to ensure that I am happy at all points of time doing what I'm doing. And
Yes.
definitely, investment banking wasn't making me happy. So, irrespective of whether, according to what society tells me is a good career to follow, wasn't the best way for me to move ahead, right? So I quit investment banking, almost immediately in the next few months, and I didn't know what to do next. So, like any other Indian, person, I gave the cat, because we have finished engineering. So, the
Yeah.
next thing that we usually do is to write the cat in our effort to get an MBA, which is what I did. And fortunately or unfortunately, I got through, right? And I joined IIM Ahmedabad, and the thing that I realized the moment I went into IIM Ahmedabad, as I told you just before, my goal was to find something that I was happy doing, right?
Yes.
And it was I felt that an MBA might give me the time to explore the things that I would be interested in, the things that I might like doing on a daily basis, and maybe hopefully for the rest of my life, right?
Yeah.
And as it would turn out, in the very first week of joining the college, all anyone could talk about, or at least predominantly anyone could talk about, was placements, right? Just getting into the college, instead of talking about what I felt would have been more of an educational experience and about learning and so on. It was all biased towards what is the job that one can get, right? And it was about CV related points. It was, various gatherings held by the placement committee, where all the things that they would ever talk about is how we should prepare for the placement season, for the internship season, and so on. So it was I was quite thrown aback, because this was certainly not the experience that I had envisioned, right? So and not to be immodest in any nature, but I already had left the best job that I could have possibly got out of IIM Ahmedabad, right? My JP Morgan job was possibly the best job I could have gotten out of IIM Ahmedabad. So for me, all of this was just very jarring and something that I really didn't want to associate myself with. So it made my decision to actually explore entrepreneurship that much easier,
Yes.
right? Because at that point of time, I felt, okay, the only way for me to stay away from this madness is to quit it entirely. So I quit the placement process in the very first month of joining IIM Ahmedabad, and I said, I need to apply myself into into finding what I really want to do in the entrepreneurship journey. And that's where I used to walk around with an idea book, as I used to call it, write down all the ideas that I felt would be worth working on, right? And I used to then call different friends of mine and used to tell them to critique my idea, and each one used to share their views on what my whether my startup idea made sense, what they felt would be the problems, and so on. And over a period of time, I just found my comfort in the idea, which has today become flexible, right? And I worked on it in the first year of my of the college, and that's where I approached one of my current co-founders, Rishikesh. And initially, I was a non-techie, at least back then. I feel that I have now become somewhat of a tech person myself as well. But at that point of time, I felt that Rishikesh, who had a background of core engineer, computer science, and worked in Adobe, Amazon, and then joined, IIM Ahmedabad, I felt that he would be someone who could guide me. And at that point of time, I didn't approach him as a co-founder. So a lot of you guys might have a question on how to find a co-founder, right? So I felt I just approached him as a guide, as someone who can help me in my decision making, right? And then when I felt that his way of thinking really matched with my way of thinking, his personality was someone whom I would really like to be around, I asked him if he would consider joining Flexipur. He had already applied and gotten through one of the leading consulting companies, BCG. So he did his internship there, but he was very clear that he would also really like to associate himself with Flexipur. And towards the second year of our college, my third co-founder, he also joined in. He did it again. He didn't join as a co-founder. Yeah, he just came in more from a perspective of, okay, let me just understand how startups work. So maybe I can just be around you guys and work on this as a project.
Yeah.
And towards the end of that year, even we felt that, we really liked his contribution. We really liked the personality which he brought in. And each of us were very different personalities with very different strengths, but we felt that we got along with each other very, very well. So we asked him, and even he was very happy to join us. So since then is when Flexible started, officially, which is like in 2017 end. Sorry, 2017 beginning,
2016.
2016
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
Yeah. So
I,
yeah,
I,
and
s- I saw
yeah,
you.
good.
You early started Flexible, a team of three. You, Rishikesh,
Yeah,
and Anshul. And talk us about
yeah,
those days. How you brainstorm on ideas and plan execution for specifically of Flexible.
yeah, sure. So I think very early, as I told you, I used to just carry an idea book, right? And
Yeah.
ideas are very abstract, right?
Yes.
You can an idea means nothing because you possibly have 4 or 5 bullet points next to it. Then you say, okay, I'll make a business model canvas, and then you try to add a lot of different information. But most of all of that information is possibly just to convince your own self that you're thinking about it in the most wholesome fashion as possible. I think it might sound like a cliche, but it is true that there is no other way to really know and understand your idea and your startup other than by actually doing it, right? So initially we started off by just saying, okay, I'll make a product, right? And I've shared this a lot of times that
Yes.
not only maybe the mistakes that we made in IIM Ahmedabad, but even after graduating, when we started off, we actually made 2 products and we spent a lot of money making, right? And we felt the way we should go about it is to scale, right? As in we should build our product
Product.
such that we get to a level where, even 100,000 users are, or maybe even 1 million users are very easily able to use it. The bandwidth constraints at our end shouldn't really stop it, and so on. So, and
Yeah.
that's how each and every person who has an idea thinks, right? They think about how will
Skill.
they get million users and how will they get scale exactly.
Yeah.
And as I recently mentioned on Twitter as well, I think that is the most stupid thing which we did, and I think which is possibly a very recurring theme in very early stage entrepreneurs, right? Which is to think of scale before you made even a single dollar of money, right? Because at
Yes.
that point of time, you don't really understand what scale looks like. You don't even understand what making $1 looks like or what $10, what that looks like, right? So I think you're optimizing. So what is basically preparing for scale, right? The preparing for scale basically means trying to tackle all the bottlenecks that you might face on possibly through tech, right? So
Yes.
how will you ever predict what your bottlenecks are going to be before even maybe making $100, maybe $1,000, because you don't know what are the recurring actions that your users are going to take with you. You don't know what recurring actions you are going to do internally in your company, so you don't know what to optimize, right? So I think for any early stage entrepreneur, irrespective of the idea, right, uh, scale is something I think is at a pre-revenue level, maybe even at a level of making just $100, is a really very foolish thought to have. I think a person should just think of making their first $10 and making the next $90 to get to 100, then make the next $900 to get to 1,000, and then so on. Just keep moving with very key goals which you can actually see and plan for. Scale is something which people think is absolute, right? People think scale means having million users. I think scale is actually something which is a moving target, right? So on day one, your scale is not a million users. Your scale is maybe to make your first $100. Once you've
Yes.
made that, scale can be redefined to get the next $1,000. Then you redefine scale to get your first $10,000 and so on. The point being that I think at every point of time, it is only possible for you to prepare for something which you actually have knowledge for. None of us can ever prepare for something which we don't know, right? So preparing for something which you don't know eventually just makes you optimize for things which are essentially not needed because you're estimating everything. And that's exactly what we did, right? We made 2 products and both of them failed. We spent $5,000 each, which is like around in today's exchange rate, maybe 3.5, 4 lakhs, right? And all
Yes.
of that went into the bin. We threw it into the bin straight on because none of our users ever wanted to use it. We were forcing them to use the product,
I saw
right?
on a Flexible website that product name UA Curator Podium Matchmaker. Is that same product you're talking about?
Oh, so are you talking about the old website that we
Yeah.
had?
Yes.
Yeah. So we tried to make it now. Possibly what you see is just the marketing side, but we
Yes.
had made a really extended product which wasn't very public, which we were onboarding clients one by one on, right? So all of our clients never wanted to use it. Even freelancers, when we used to tell them to sign up and go through our entire process, they didn't enjoy going through it. So we realized that, frankly, we needed to start making money and not force our users to, go through a website just because we made it, or make a product just because we made it. And
Yes.
the way we went about it thereafter was to just tell them, okay, boss, tell us what you want us to solve. So we had two customers essentially, right? Two of our customers were freelancers and companies. So
Yes.
freelancers wanted to get projects,
Job.
and companies wanted great people to work with. So we said, okay, what's the way that we can make that happen? A simple Google Sheets would do. Okay, let's start just using Google Sheets. So if we find an interesting freelancer on LinkedIn, just note their name, LinkedIn URL, all the conversations you've had with them, maybe their skill sets and so on in one tab. If you talk to a client, just start mentioning all their requirements and their talent requirements in another tab. And then just start seeing if using this particular Google Sheet, can you start matching people, right? So to do that, if you have to manually send an email, send an email. If something starts off, you have to send an invoice to them, manually make an invoice in Microsoft Word, convert that into a PDF. And send it.
PDF. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it is important for you to know all of these things. I think when I say you, I mean for us, it was very important to know, because we knew that, okay, this is how you actually make money. So we made our first, few $1,000s. We got to even $100,000 just with Google Sheets. And that's when we started realizing, okay, we were just, again, the three of us, Rishikesh, Suvansh, and me. And we realized, okay, now we've gotten to a level where we are not able to just survive through a Google Sheet, right? And that's when we realized, okay, possibly now we need to start optimizing for things. But at that point of time, we actually knew what to optimize for, right? Because we knew, okay, reaching out to freelancers, because all of our outbound activity was happening on LinkedIn. So we were actually sending messages to them one by one. So we felt, okay, this isn't something that is viable. So we need something that can send at least our initial connection request to freelancers on LinkedIn in an automated fashion, maybe our first message to them in an automated fashion. And then maybe when they start conversing with us, then we start conversing with them one-on-one. So we started automating those things. Then if a freelancer filled our profile form, right? So
Yeah.
that automatically gets saved in our database. So we wanted that to happen and not for us to manually enter their details. So we built that flow. Then maybe when we had our next screening processes in terms of interviews and so on, we just had a few automations there which would move them to our CRM so that the next steps can be taken. So, and again, all of this was not done through a product. We said, okay, we have one automation to make at one point of time. All we will use is something like Zapier, which is an automation tool, then something like Airtable. We were using Zoho CRM at that point of time. So all of this was connected using Zapier and having Airtable and Zoho at that point of time. So it was only, looking at what will get us now from $100,000 to maybe 200,000 or 300,000. And we felt that these incremental things would get us from one level of scale to the next. And it was only when we realized, okay, that Zoho was really not getting us to the next level, that we really started focusing a lot on Airtable and scaling ourselves over there. We started writing scripts on Airtable, small scripts which would automate the selection of freelancers for a particular requirement and so on. So essentially what I'm getting at in this entire conversation is that, scale is not absolute, right? So you can't plan on day one to start optimizing for 1 million people or for $1 million. That will be really a foolish thing to do, and that's what we did. And we realized that, and we did what we needed to get our first amount of money, then the next amount of money, and then so on. So I think this was one of the very pivotal things that we learned, that, don't, and as, I've shared on Twitter earlier as well, don't use your startup to build tech, right? Use tech to build your startup, right? It's very key, and people sometimes just get lost in this entire story. Right? They think that the entire thing, and it is not, I think, everyone's fault. It's just there's just so much of popular media talking about AI, ML, blockchain, and even in normal tech languages, you'll not hear PHP or Rails. You'll only hear Go, and all of the latest frameworks. Right? So the idea is people start giving too much value to these buzzwords rather than what is actually required on the ground and in execution. Right. So I think that has been our story, and since then it has been all about execution, all about being sustainable, and I think that is at the very core of Flexible, which is to be sustainable, be able, and in the world of unicorns. 2021 is the year of unicorns, right, in India.
Yes.
So in the year of unicorns, I think we still are one of, you can call, the old-fashioned company, where we still believe that companies should be sustainable. You should make more money than you spend. So every initiative that we take is always from a perspective of sustainability. And of course, as we have grown, maybe 4 years back, I would think of how will I survive for the next 1 month. Then maybe a couple of years down the line, it became how will I survive the next 6 months. Now it's about how will I survive for the next 2 years, right? So your horizon changes as you grow, and that's my point entirely overall. Don't keep your goals absolute. So it's never going to be about $1 million. It's never going to be about planning the next 5 years. I think it's always going to be about planning incrementally so that you're able to achieve your goals, which you decide, and not what popular tech media decides for you, right? So becoming a unicorn in X number of years is not a necessity, and it is something which you get really pressurized as a startup founder to do. And I think what each and everyone needs to be really clear is to align on what our goals are in when we are building a startup, right? And that it doesn't necessarily have to be building a unicorn. It might just be building a sustainable company which gives us happiness in building, right? So in essence, all my from BITS Pilani to here, I think I can summarize it by saying that what I've been trying to do is to just chase happiness, right?
You said the concept of optimizing for maximizing that happiness.
Yes. So I think people optimize for better career growth, right? And we often think that optimizing for career growth is synonymous with optimizing for happiness, life happiness. And I don't think that's true whatsoever, right? A career is a part of your life, right? It's not your life in entirety. But we treat our life as if that is entire. Our career is the whole of our life, and that makes us, do things that we later realize. Okay, why am I still not happy? I tried to do 10 different things, and I've still not achieved happiness. The answer is that we never tried to optimize for it. We just tried to optimize for career growth or whatever it is. So I think since my engineering days, and especially after JP Morgan, it is all about chasing happiness, optimizing for happiness, and that has led to Flexible, but also not only Flexible, but the philosophy behind how we want to grow Flexible and so on. So yeah, that's been the journey. I think it's given enough of context to everyone listening. So Vishal, if you think it is a good time,
I have some questions like in engineering days, how you got interested in business? Like you worked at interned at Sabre Holdings, and what books, people or content you consume or influenced by in those days?
No, and so let me be really very realistic again, right? Like,
yes,
I don't think I was, I don't think I was mature immediately after engineering. So I think there's again too much of pressure, right? You see 15, 16-year-olds talking very maturely, and kudos to them, right? If they're able to think so maturely at such a very young age. But I think not everyone is, not all of us are unique personalities, right? And we need to respect that. And just having an external benchmark on that person reads so many books, they read so many good blogs, and they talk so smartly about business is something which is not a very healthy thing to be doing. And I certainly wasn't someone who could talk business when I was 18 years old or even maybe 22, 23 years old. I possibly have started talking a little more intelligently in only in the last 5 6 years, right? And it's been incrementally better only since then, and even now I think I'm continuously learning. So now talking about what I read and all, I don't read too much. I don't like non-fiction books. I read only fiction. Uh, very again, very I think not something that most people would say, but yes, that's the truth. I believe in learning by doing. Right. So a lot of everything that I've learned at Flexible, whether it's in terms of learning SEO, whether it's in terms of building products, actual writing code, even no code tools, all of this is something that I've learned over a period of time by making about 1,000 mistakes, right? And
Yes.
knowing what not to do by making those own mistakes. Is that the best way? I don't know, right? So maybe by reading books, I might have not made the mistakes, maybe. But I also think that if I would have made just read those books, maybe I wouldn't have done anything whatsoever. I would have just been reading one book after the other. And so it is again the philosophy of one versus the other. My way of going about it has always been to just push myself to do things, falter at it, make a lot of mistakes, find what works for me, and then just move on. Like even today, I feel I know a lot about SEO, but when people start talking to me in terms of jargons and tell me some 15 or 20 different SEO strategies, I'll know none of them because I've read none of those books. But I work in my own way, and that's I think what every one of us should aspire to do. There is no one right way to build a product. There's no one right way to market. Whether it is in marketing to write copy or whether it is to do social media marketing or SEO, whatever. There's no one right way to do any of this. I think we all need to find our own right way to do it, own personality to get to a place where we enjoy what we are doing and get results out of it. So, coming to your particular question, I didn't read any particular books right out of college. Even now, I read no non-fiction books. I read only fiction, and I do that just so that I get my mind out of the things that I do day in day out. So, unlike what most people might advise, I have no startup books to advise anyone to read or any business books to read.
And
I just do
non-fiction
my
ones?
thing. Yeah, no non-fiction. I read no non-fiction.
Sorry,
I read
fiction
purely.
ones? Yeah.
In fiction, I really love fantasy fiction. So again, it just opens my mind to beyond what is happening in our world, right? So fantasy fiction is very imaginative. I also find it more philosophical because people, the authors are really good. They have a really good imagination. So of course, the popular ones are there. You have Game of Thrones, and all of that is there. But there are also some of the more I think less read ones, which I like a lot. Yeah.
Karthik, one of the key things in like IIM Ahmedabad, maybe tell us about something that you got your attention and can help students like us who are listening.
Mm-hmm. From what perspective, though? As in
Entrepreneurship perspective, or your learnings from Sunil Honda sir class.
Sunil Honda sir actually didn't teach us, so I never
Okay.
got to learn from him directly. But I did meet him. I did talk to him. I think, see, my learnings at IIM Ahmedabad were less from the classroom, but more from just interacting with people. And I think that is true about most parts of life, right? As in, I think we learn more from actually seeing other people do things, seeing other people's actions, rather than just, bookish stuff. And that was the case with IIM Ahmedabad as well. And I think if I have to just give one theory which really helps, and which now looking back I've realized is a theory, but I never applied it as a theoretical concept, is thinking about everything in a first principles mode, right? As in, what I mean by that is whenever we think about any problem, right? We actually, let's say, for example, when you think about building Uber, right? Like
Yes.
if Uber didn't exist and you were to build Uber today, right?
Yes.
The first thing which a person would say is, I will build an app, right? They'll say, I need to go and build an app today because Uber has an app. So I need to build an app, and app is everything because Uber has such amazing technology and they have such an amazing tech team. So that's the way to build Uber. But that's just not the right way to think about it, right? Because Uber doesn't exist. That's where you need to start from. And you need to start from saying, okay, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is Uber trying to solve? It is trying to help drivers get more riders, and riders find drivers in the
That's
most
more
comfortable
easily.
fashion and most convenient fashion as possible.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So when you think about it, yes, now in today's context, it's almost impossible to build a B2C company, I feel, without taking on funding. But that's an entire different discussion altogether. I feel that, should you build startup, should you work on startup ideas where you're entirely at the mercy of a venture capital fund? I don't know. That's an entire topic for us to explore. But coming back to the Uber concept, which you were talking about, when you think about this, the first thing that I think about, not only Uber and now just templatizing it for any marketplace, whether it is Swiggy, by Swiggy I mean any food delivery app, right? Or any marketplace in general, you're just trying to connect two people, right? So
Yes.
that can be done very simply, like we did in Flexible through a Google Sheets. So you can just maybe make a Google form. In the very initial stages, I say to start Uber, just have a website where you market your phone number, right? And tell everyone to just give you a call. And you should have phone numbers of 15 drivers who we have just gone and spoken to, saying, I will give you a lot of rides. Why will you be open to it? So the moment some customer tells you, I want a ride, call those 15 drivers and ask if any one of them is free. So your immediate question to me will be, oh, this doesn't sound scalable at all. How can I alone manage all of this? I'm like, on day zero, how many rides do you have? You have 0 rides, right? So start
Yes.
getting a first 5 rides, right? Start getting a next 20 rides, next 50 rides. Get to a place where your bandwidth is actually a bottleneck. If your bandwidth becomes a bottleneck, tap the shoulder of your sister, brother, your friend, whoever, your father, mother, anyone. Just get them involved and say, okay, I'm not able to do this. Here is a phone. Here are another 15 numbers of drivers. I am now going to advertise your number also on my website. So whenever any customer wants, they'll be calling me or you. So just
Yeah.
start doing this, right? Of course, you can't now get a operation of hundreds of people just taking calls from customers. But your first maybe 1,000 rides can be booked in that fashion. But in essence, you would have by then understood what are the exact pain points that customers are facing. What are the exact pain points that are happening when drivers are being asked to go to a customer's house? What are the exact pain points that are happening when actually customers actually take the ride with a particular driver?
The recurring
Right.
events. Yes.
Right. Instead, what people do is they start building an app, right?
Yeah.
And building an app is not easy. Building an app is not cheap, right? And building a startup is so tough. You don't want to be spending your time doing things that are not necessary at that point of time, right? So yeah, there are already hundreds of problems that you have to solve. You don't necessarily want to be adding one other problem onto the table, which is a building tech, right? If it is not needed. And my position with tech is not that I dislike it. In fact, Flexible's entire offering is of hiring developers and designers, right? But my
Yes.
point is, at the end of the day, you need to do what gives you success, what gets you to the next level of success. And people just equate that to building really high quality tech. And somehow I think that is not smart. And that's what possibly my learning was, as you asked me initially, what was my learning during those IIM Ahmedabad days, during my early Flexible days, was that, start thinking about it from a first principles mode. Don't just look at a problem and say, okay, how have other people solved it? Let me just copy it immediately from there to here. Think about what actually the core problem is. In this case, the core problem, if you define it for the two users, for drivers was to find customers, for customers was to find a convenient way to get a ride. Start from there and start building a solution from there. If the end output of that particular, brainstorming is that you need to build an app, so be it. But starting from a place where you say that the only solution is an app means that you're already rejecting hundreds of other possible solutions. And this is not only in the world of product building or building a startup, this is true for anything. And I could say bringing in that kind of a first principles or an engineering mindset to marketing, to sales, so on is super helpful. Because in essence, what you're doing in startups, irrespective of whatever function you're looking into, is just solving problems, right? So at the end of the day, you need to really dumb down your problem and start thinking from laying the very first brick of the solution, and then start looking at what how you should go about solving. I somehow feel that people typically just try to borrow solutions without applying context to it. You find a problem, you immediately look around and you say, okay, what have other people done? And you immediately copy paste the solution. And that's really very harmful, right? Because you have zero context about how or why they implemented that solution. And you're not giving yourself the room to be able to find a better solution, or room to be able to find the logic behind coming up to the same solution, which can possibly help you, develop it, or, even tweak it to your own context. So I think that was one of my many learnings in the early days in the college and stuff.
Yes.
Yes, Karthik, as flexible being a B2B business model, what are your views on it? Like in terms of scalability, longevity, and in terms of cash burning?
See, I think, as I was alluding to earlier, I think B2C businesses in today's world are not, it's almost impossible to build a B2C business. When I say impossible to build a B2C business without funding, of course, you can build a small boutique if you want to, and there is nothing wrong with that. If anyone tells you that you should build a startup to make it a unicorn, they are absolutely foolish. Don't listen to them, right? Startups are not meant to be, there's only not one single template of a startup, right? Not all startups need to be a unicorn. The word startup has sort of been really distorted in our world, right? And I think it has got a lot to do with popular tech media, a lot to do with how VCs dominate that popular conversation and communication with people, right? That we think about that being the only way. So coming back to B2C businesses, I think if you want to build something which really grows into millions and millions of dollars, if that is what you want to do, I think B2C business, it's almost impossible to do it without taking on VC funding. Immediately people will give me the example of Apple, people will give me example of something and so on. But Apple also burnt huge amount of money for many decades, and it was turned around as recent as just a decade and a half ago. Right? So we shouldn't, and it's possibly a very outlier in every aspect, right? And we've got some Indian examples like Zerodha, which is possibly in the B2C sector. And again, I would still call it an anomaly, right? Somehow on the B2B aspect, I think if your goals of building a startup align in a way that you want to bootstrap the journey or you want to make it in a sustainable fashion, I think thinking about B2B concepts is a much better way to go about it, because businesses are a lot more loyal than individual customers. And I say that as being an owner of a business, but also being an individual customer myself, right? When I look at things or buy things on an individual level, I'm not loyal at all. I go to the place which gives me the best offer. But on a business level, there is a lot more stickiness because there is a lot more invested. You want to invest into things and buy things that you really trust, and so on and so forth. So B2B businesses, I feel, if you want to build something sustainable, bootstrapped, and which you can scale over a period of time, I think B2B is the sector that you need to look at. Of course, there are certain caveats over there. B2B, of course, it takes a lot more because it's a natural consequence, right? If companies are loyal to you, that means that if they are not your customer, they are loyal to someone else. So to move their loyalty from them to you is going to be tough. So that is the case. But once you do actually move their loyalty from them to you, it is going to be really tough for someone else also to sort of steal them from you. So, and I also feel that companies are more open to paying money and paying good money if you promise them quality or if you solve them problems. Again, something which I don't think is true so much in the B2C sector, right? Of course, if someone is chasing fame and popularity, I think again B2C is a better place to be in, because B2C apps are the ones that we use all the time, so it is more well known. So if we talk about a lot of B2B businesses, they will not be at the top of mind of every regular customer. But a B2C business, even if it is the most loss-making business, its brand awareness will be really huge.
Yes.
So it all depends on what one's personality is, what one's goals are in terms of building a startup. But yeah, if you talk about B2B, I think it's sustainability, patience, and all of that is what your philosophy is behind building a startup. I think B2B is really a good space to be.
Yes, like I have also seen that B2C companies now are increasing in valuation much faster, okay? But their revenues are zero and are in big losses.
Yeah, so the entire VC valuation business is again something that is an entirely separate chapter. We can talk a lot about it. But yeah, I think lesser spoken about valuations, more we speak about the value we add is better. So yeah.
Yes, now I will be accepting for Ask Me Anything session. Please ask your question in like complete in half second, 30 seconds. Yes, Krishna. Hello. Yes, Krishna, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, Karthik, congrats on the journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So does the branding required in order to get funding, or else? And one more question, I just wanted to ask you: how was your initial life running your startup? Like without being funded, you created 2 applications, and you spent a lot of money over there. And how was your life at the time? I'm so curious to know these 2 things.
Sure. See, from a funding perspective, I'm surely not the best person to answer that question. Like Flexible has not raised funding, so I don't know what VCs look for when they say when you're asking from a perspective of brand. Personally, I would just say now we get about, I think, at least 15 mails every week from different VCs asking us if we want to raise, right? But that is now 4 years hence, right? Even initially, given that we had a good educational background, we did have VCs who spoke to us. But I think, it's just a wrong way to think about startups, I think. When you think about a startup, thinking about it from a VC first perspective, always choose your way in which you want to build a startup, right? Again, we spoke about thinking about it from a first principles perspective. People think if they have to start up, they have to raise VC funding because they see hundreds of other startups do the same, right? But I would rather start from a perspective of asking yourself, what does success mean to you as a startup? And define that success. Let's say that success is getting to $1 million or whatever. And then break it down into more manageable and realistic goals, which is what do I want to achieve in the next 3 months? What do I want to achieve in the next 6 and 12 months and so on? And once you put those more realistic goals, then ask yourself, is VC funding is the only way to grow and is the only way to survive? And personally, and I'll again tell you, this is entirely my personality, so I'll not, impress that upon you. But I personally wouldn't ever like to be at the mercy of someone else, right? So what I mean by that is, I don't want my startup to survive or grow only because, or if someone gives money to us, right? So that was our philosophy in the very beginning, and that's the reason that we bootstrapped Flexible, right? So again, I don't know if I've answered your question on VC funding because that's really not my area of expertise. But coming to your question around the money we burnt on our product, it came from our own savings, because all 3 of us had worked for 3 years before starting up. So we had a small pool of our own savings, and it was really painful for that to be burnt, right? And for the products to be thrown into the bin, it was quite painful. But that's the thing, right? Unlike a VC funded startup, we didn't have the luxury of saying, okay, 2 products are down the bin. Now let's start our work on the 3rd product, right? So that wasn't the way that we thought about it. Hello?
Yeah. I'm listening.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I dropped off. No, so I think if we would have been a VC funded business, our approach to this would have been very different, right? I think we would have gone on iterating a product not to the third time, but maybe even to the 10th or the 12th or the 15th time, till we just forced our way into our customers accepting it, or till the point we would have just burnt all of the money that we had and no other VC would ever fund us. Right? I guess that would have been our approach. But given that we had burned through all our savings, our next thing was, okay, how do we just survive the next month? Right? So it was tough, and I'm not going to glamorize the growth, a journey of a bootstrapping startup. It is super tough, and possibly that's why it might be easier for people to take on VC funding, because when you have VC funding, you can possibly pay yourself a decent amount. We paid ourselves spit-ins, right? Like very little, and we survived very frugally. Definitely, our friends from our college were earning maybe 10 times what we were earning and had a much better lifestyle. So these are realities. Yeah, these are realities, but it is every decision that you make has a consequence, right? So we decided that we will bootstrap. So this was the consequence of it, but we also had a lot more control on our destiny in terms of how we want to be really building our startup. Versus if we would have been VC funded, possibly some of this journey would have been a lot more easy for us in terms of we would have had a better lifestyle. But I don't know if the journey of Flexible would have been our design or if it would have been a more of an external design. So it was tough. Overall, the first 2 years, there were moments of absolute despair and times when we were questioning whether this entire journey is worth it or not. But that is the journey of an entrepreneur and of entrepreneurship in general. It is about a lot of lows and possibly some highs here and there, which just make you sustain through those lows and which give you a new lease of life so that you can maybe survive for the next 3 months and then, possibly build some kind of momentum. So it's a lot of luck. We had a lot of luck our way as well. So but it wasn't without tough moments. Yeah.
Yes, moving to next question.
Sure.
So Karthik, we see in B2C businesses or building tech products which people use every day, it involves community building. People leverage community there. So I have seen you be a B2B business. You have made your community here. You share content on Twitter and or other platforms. So how you leverage community in a B2B business?
Yeah, great question actually. So see, firstly, I don't think B2B communities has anything to do only with B2C business. I think community is basically a group of people who really want to support each other, right? That is what a community is. I don't know the exact Oxford Dictionary definition of it, but in essence, that is what it would be. So even for a B2B business, you are solving a particular problem for a group of customers. So your community in essence is basically all those group of customers who are facing the similar problem, right? And you get together and you talk together, you ideate, and when you think of community, right, and when businesses think of community, again, what I feel typically what businesses do is to have a very unidimensional kind of communication, which is very related to the only solution that they as a business provide, right? If, let's say, I as a business, I am providing, let's say, recruitment software. So the only thing that I talk on social media and community is all about recruitment and all about how SaaS businesses work. So, but that's not what community is about. Community is about not thinking about it from the point of view of your business. It's about thinking about the point of view of the people in the community and what are the likely problems that most of them are facing, right? So that's the approach that I typically take on Twitter and also what Rishikesh takes on Twitter or whatever social media platforms you're on. We really identify with startups and entrepreneurs and startup enthusiasts in general. So we talk about our startup journey and the difficulties that we faced, the things that we learned, the mistakes we made, some few lessons, things that might help people in their own journey and so on. And we feel that like-minded group also possibly face the problem that our company tries to solve, which is helping startups hire quality talent, right? But we ensure that in every tweet of ours, we are not just talking about, okay, here, Flexible helps you hire talent and this is how you should do it and hiring talent and so on and so forth. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what is the problem startups in general are facing, right? And what is the problem entrepreneurs in general are facing. So then when you think about it in that fashion, community building can be thought of for anything, not just for B2C businesses or B2B businesses. It is for any like-minded group of people who get together and are possibly trying to solve relatable things or relatable problems that each one of them are facing in their lives. So that's the approach we have taken.
Great, great.
Thank you.
Yes, Percy, you can go on. Saurav, Jagdish, you can also ask your question.
Yeah, thanks Karthik for doing this, and congratulations on your journey. So my question is basically, how did you onboard this business? So I understand that you use LinkedIn for finding these developers, but I want to know more about like how someone go about for this specific example or for any other example, how someone go about onboarding businesses.
Right. So I'm getting a lot of echo. Okay, yeah, now it's fine. So yeah, our approach was, as I told you, it became very survival focused, right? Because we were just trying to survive the next month and so on. So what we did was we felt that we had a good network in India, and so we just opened up LinkedIn, and on the side we also opened up something like Crunchbase or so on, where you get the list of companies that got funded in the last 12 months, right? So our bet was that if they have got funded in the last 12 months, then they're possibly looking to hire and grow their team. So maybe our solution might be useful for them. So that's what we did. We actually just looked for all of those companies on Crunchbase, listed them down, started keying them on LinkedIn, and we looked at any person we knew on LinkedIn who was a part of any of those companies, right? And then we would reach out to them, and if they were my immediate connection, I would know them in some fashion, I hope. So I would ask them to sort of give me an introduction with the relevant person in their company. Even if they weren't an immediate connection, if they were a second connection, I would tell them to introduce me with the person who was actually working in that particular company. So, and when I used to get introduced to that person, I would ask that person to then introduce me to the relevant person in his or her company. And so overall, it was a lot of manual work, lot of hustle, lot of rejections. So if I spoke to, or if I messaged maybe 100 people, maybe 10 people would reply to me, 6 or 7 would give me maybe some kind of positive response. I would possibly end up talking to 3 or 4 right people in the company, and maybe I would sell to one, right, and actually convert. So I think the entire journey of a startup, at least if you want to really grow and scale, starts from really being very outbound focused, right? Very sales focused. And you're just like, okay, just sell, just get any 1%, 2 people, 10 people to buy my product, and then say, okay, now I don't have to think about survival. I'm making a decent amount of money from 10, 20 people. And at that point of time, you have the luxury to then start building your inbound pipeline, right? And that's what we did thereafter. We focused a lot on SEO. We focused a lot on being more active on relevant communities and so on, so that we could build, inbound leads coming to our business, which we couldn't afford to do in the early stage, because early on we had to survive, and inbound takes time. Inbound takes about 6-8 months to start firing at even a very feeble level, right? So outbound ensured that we survived in the initial stages and gave us the luxury to be able to build the inbound pipeline thereafter. So yeah, I hope it answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. It does. Thanks, Karthik. And best of luck for your future.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sir, I'm moving you to listener. Jagdish, you can ask your question.
Yes. Hello, Karthik. It's Jagdish.
Hey, Jagdish.
Congratulations, Karthik, for your journey. What you're doing inspires a lot. That you can grow your startup without VC money. Yeah. I want to ask question about how you so you definitely first build a MVP. So my question is to you, how you validate your idea?
Yeah. See, yeah. Is that it, Jagdish, or you want to add something to it?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I think every aspiring entrepreneur entrepreneur's first question is how do they validate their idea, right? And the only true answer is that you can get no validation unless you actually start off. That's the only truthful, honest answer. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying, right? Because there is no way to actually validate whether your idea is feasible or not before actually going for it and before actually a customer pays you money to buy whatever you're offering them. That's the truth. Now, having said that, we did it very poorly, right? As in, I spoke to people, I spoke to freelancers, I spoke to companies. Everyone told me their pain points, and surveys are great. Surveys will always tell you exactly what you want to hear, right? So that's why in the validation stage, it can be really tricky to just run surveys and do a lot of these focused discussions only, because you're so motivated about your idea that you will listen and you will hear things that you want to be hearing, right? So you will hear people tell you that yes, what you're solving is the problem that they want you to solve, and people will tell you need to be unemotional about it and you need to be objective and so on. It's not as easy as people want you to believe it to be. Having said that, I think there are a few ways you can try to make a more educated guess on whether there is a particular market for your idea or not. A few ways. I think people think that if there are competitors in the market, it is actually bad. I feel not at all. If there are competitors in the market, it means that there are customers as well, right? So having competitors in your market is the first validation of the fact that your idea is good. So it's not it's not doomsday, it's not sad news, it's actually good news for you, right? That there are competitors in the market. Then I believe big in SEO. So SEO for people who don't follow so much of marketing, SEO is this search engine optimization. Basically, all of us search on Google also on the day. So if there is a problem, people search on Google, right? So you need to go and see there are many tools out there where you can understand what's the volume of a particular search phrase, right? So if your customers are facing a particular problem, they are likely searching on Google. So you should go and check on these various tools which offer those search volume for those phrases and see if phrases related to your particular startup idea have a decent amount of search volume or not. If that is a yes, then that also possibly indicates that, okay, people think this is a problem and they are looking out for solutions on Google. Of course, whether they'll pay for it, whether it is a really deep problem, all of that is not told through SEO, but that's maybe one more way of going about it. Thereafter, I think when people think of an MVP or a minimum viable product, they think about it as an entire full-fledged product which is really complex and so on. I think an MVP can be anything. An MVP can be a newsletter, where you're just sharing your ideas, you're sharing your thoughts about that particular industry. You start building a good subscriber audience, and then you learn from the audience. It starts from you telling them, but then you start learning from your audience itself. So your MVP can be that. You start from a newsletter, you give your expert view on that particular sector, and then actually your potential customers start teaching you on what could be a problem you could solve for them. Thereafter, it could also be just a social media account, right? If you're a B2C company, go big on Instagram, start building a good audience. Again, just learn from your audience what you should be building, right? Otherwise, build a good audience on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or wherever. So maybe just building that kind of a community first on these various platforms can be your MVP as well. So we just need to expand our view on what a minimum viable prototype is. And I think using stuff like no-code tools just makes no-code tools are just tools which allow you to build websites and products without knowing how to code, right? So using such no-code tools, leveraging it to be able to build a quick prototype affordably, but also quickly is another way that you can try to get quicker to validation. It's not a way to validate, but it allows you, it accelerates your path to validation, right? Because now no longer do you have to think of hiring an entire developer team, building the product, think of how you're going to be paying them, maybe raise VC funding as a consequence of that. So none of those things are required. So I think no-code tools are also another way of getting quicker to idea validation. So all of these are various different methods. There are maybe some more I wrote a thread on it as well. But at the end of it, I think the truth is that startup validation happens by actually doing it, right? There is no way of predicting whether an idea will be 100% success or failure, right? And a startup idea is also not etched in stone, right? When you start off with a particular notion of what problem you're solving, and that notion becomes more and more clear as you keep digging and doing more of work on your startup. And your idea also moves and takes a shape along the way. So when people talk of startup idea validation, it is not really fair because your idea is not really matured. So trying to do it, validate your idea before actually starting up, really doing it is really very tough. But possibly some of the proxies I mentioned might be some of the things you might want to look at before maybe starting. Yeah, that's the long answer to your question.
Karthik,
Yeah.
Karthik, I want to
That's
know.
it. Thanks for sharing, Karthik.
Cheers, Jagdish. Yeah, Vishal.
Yeah, I want to know your learning curve of no code tool. How long it took you to get comfortable, and can I know the period you started using those tools?
Yeah, again, when we decided to totally abandon, making really complex products, we started using really simple tools.
Yes.
Started with Google Sheet, then Airtable, then we started using Zapier, and it wasn't that I started and I immediately added 10 no-code tools, immediately. It was like one after the other, and each one to solve very specific problems, right? So that's how it's been. And it's been over a period of time. It's been over the last 3 years that I have picked up one tool after the other. But I think each tool has its own learning curve because each tool tries to solve a very specific problem. Like Zapier or Integromat are for connecting two applications, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
Zapier and Integromat possibly do the same thing, but Zapier is easier to learn. Integromat takes a little bit more time to learn, but the amount of things or the breadth of things
Possible
that you can is
Possible integrament. Yes.
is a lot more. Yeah. Similarly, it took me let's say around 20 days to get a hang of Webflow, but once I picked up Webflow, I got much better at it, and after that I built a couple of products on it. But then I picked up Bubble. Bubble took me 15-20 days to get comfortable, but maybe I would say a month and a half to get to a place where now I can start thinking of really innovative solutions around it. But my entire point of no code is to think of ways, yes, definitely, where you don't need code to build your
Yes.
products, but at the same time, don't be averse to code, right? No code tools will never give you, I feel, to a very large extent, that they can't always solve your problems 100% of the way. So either you look for a workaround, and which is always fine, right? I think you should build in constraints because having hundreds of options only confuses you as a person and will just keep making you meander around instead of getting to a possible, intermediate workaround solution, which can still solve maybe 95% of your problems, right? So, but my entire point being, you can't, say, okay, I'll never pick up coding whatsoever. I think
Yes.
you need to have an open mind, and writing code is actually not that difficult. I think writing code, there is just a lot of mental block that people have versus that actually being tough. If people are able to pick up marketing, people are able to pick up sales, code is just one other, skill to pick up. It's just that I think there's just so much of hysteria about it, and there's just so much of, that entire, aura built around tech, which makes it really tough to approach. So yeah, no-code tools should definitely be explored, but on the whole, I think no-code tools you can leverage no-code tools better if you understand web development and coding well. And I think people shouldn't be averse to picking up web development or code along the way. Learn a bit of HTML, learn a bit of CSS, slowly start picking a bit of JavaScript, and do it over a period of time. It doesn't have to happen in a month. It can happen over the next 12 months. But never say never. I think
Yes.
the biggest bottleneck you will face on no code is if you don't understand code whatsoever. So you just have to be open to understanding at least the basics of web development, some HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I think it has to start from there.
Yes. Ayush, you can ask your question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So Karthik, I had a question. Like,
Yeah, you go on.
Sorry.
Yeah, you go on.
okay, so I have a question. Like, what does a flexible look out for an intern or a fresher while hiring them? Like, what skills do flexible look out?
Sure. This is Avi, right?
Yes, Karthik.
Yeah, sure, Avi. So, again, what we have found is that we just value attitude and a basic level of smartness, or rather a general level of smartness, rather than a very specific expertise in any function. Right. So, if we are looking to fill up a role in marketing or sales, we typically don't look for experience in marketing or sales in the person that we are trying to hire. What we look for is a person who is open to learning a lot, has a great attitude in terms of working hard, because I think a lot of work in a startup is just about moving out of your comfort zone and being able to learn new things almost every day. Right. So that is exactly what we try to look at. And because we are a fully remote company, so we have no office, not just because of the pandemic, but even otherwise we don't have an office. We are a fully remote company. Everyone works out of their own hometown and so on. We communicate a lot through written communication over Slack, over mail, and so on. So we expect a really high bar on written communication. So yeah, this would be more or less what we look at in people.
Right.
Yes, Ayush, you can ask your question.
Hi, Karthik. Thank you so much for doing this.
Cheers, Ayush.
So, I have a two-part question basically. So, when you mentioned that B2C is impossible without funding, so was it reference to the marketing and the iteration process? And also, if there's a product and it has an application to both B2C and B2B, so what could be a transition between both? And when it would be a good state for a business to do a transition?
Great questions. It's really tough for me to answer off the top of my head. But just the part one, see, I would never say never, right? As in, B2C, definitely, I think if you can build, if you have patience and if you can play the long game, I do think it is possible to build a B2C business bootstrapped as well. I just think it is a lot tougher to build a B2C business bootstrapped versus building a B2B business bootstrapped. I don't mean...
Ayush, please mute your mic.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I don't mean so much from a perspective of specific marketing, but I just think that companies in the last decade or so have spoiled individual customers so much that no one uses an app if it's not free. If you have to pay for it, people expect a lot of offers, and if there is a competitor offering a better deal or daily offer on that day, people definitely they have zero loyalty. They just move from one to the other. So optimizing for small things like better user experience and all of that, as I'm not saying is not good. There are people who still value it, but if you were to optimize that in the B2B sector versus the B2C sector, I think a very small percentage in the B2C sector will value it as compared to the B2B sector, right? So it's just tough in that fashion, I feel. So it just comes to a place where either you are free, entirely, and you think of other ways of monetizing, right? Like say something like Facebook, say social networks, right? Let's say, for example, even WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a free product, and it is, I don't want to say B2C, I don't know what to call it, but it is largely used by individual customers, right? But till today, you can't get people to pay for WhatsApp. And when WhatsApp tries to put a business model on top of it to start giving targeted ads or whatever, people start complaining about privacy, right? So it gets really tricky. People don't want to pay for WhatsApp, but people don't want to sell the data that WhatsApp is willing to sell to third parties as well. So you get to a real big conundrum there. So, but yes, of course, you still do have products like, you would have heard of Hey, which is that email product by Basecamp, which is largely now a B2C product, right? Because individuals use it. In a similar space, you have a few other products, email products as well, who have been able to build it. But again, Basecamp is a really big company. They've been able to invest a lot into the product. So I wouldn't call it a bootstrap journey because they really have Basecamp's money to be able to fund that product. Will you be able to do so much of work before being able to release a high quality product? I don't know. And even now, I wouldn't say Hey will ever be adopted at such a big level that it becomes a mainstream product the way WhatsApp, etc. has become, right? Because people have to pay to use Hey. People will always use Gmail. People will always use such products because it is free, but they will complain that Gmail still sells their data to advertise to them. So I think that is the conundrum with being in the B2C sector. Your second question about how do you go from B2C and then get into B2B? Truthfully, I have no answer to that. It's a very complex question, and I think it's a very contextual question. We need to look at what that B2C business is, what could they achieve, and what is the B2B business that they want to essentially start looking at in the long run. Like for example, if it is Facebook, they said, okay, you would never think of Facebook as a B2B business in the beginning, right? And even Google when you think of it. But all of those ways of saying, okay, we just give a free product to people, get a huge target base, and then use the people as our way of monetizing, that is, make targeted advertisements possible and start asking businesses to pay for those targeted advertisements has become a very overused model now. And I'm not sure if you can keep doing the same thing again and again. But yeah, I surprise myself. New things come up. I don't know how TikTok might actually start making money in that way, and so on. So so I think Facebook today is at an intersection of B2C, B2B, and so on and so forth. So it is very contextual, to be very frank. So yeah, maybe if we can discuss at some future point of time what the exact business is, maybe we can come up with a market plan.
Yeah, definitely, Karthik. Thank you so much. It was really insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can we extend the meet for 20 minutes more, if you don't mind?
Sure, Vishal. Let's do that.
Yes, Karthik, you can ask your question.
Hi, Karthik. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I've been following your work since a while. And I've been closely monitoring what you're doing at Flexible, and it's really motivating me and like a lot of other people that I know. And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, when you were starting out with the MVP of Flexible, so were you like differentiating from day one, like differentiating Flexible from competitors from day one, or did you like build these differentiating features on the way? And I just wanted to know what's your framework for differentiating a product when you launch it?
Sure, Karthik. See, to be honest, I wouldn't say Flexible is a pure product, right? Flexible is a marketplace. So, and given you're not an Upwork kind of marketplace where anyone can come on the platform, and it is the product that tries to match a freelancer with a company. In our case, it's actually people who match, like we do it. Like there are people in our company at Flexible who actually match a developer to a particular company, right? So it is, I would say, a productized service is what Flexible is. So a pure service can't be scaled. A productized service is basically something where you are able to automate maybe 80% of the thing and have 20% of manual touch points. So the 80% allows you to scale, but the 20% allows you to give a more personalized touch to the entire office. So why I had to give you this context is that I don't think we have focused too much from a perspective of this is our product and this product needs to behave uniquely in terms of, let's say, X number of features or a certain kind of user experience and so on. our entire customer experience focus has always been that people in the recruitment industry, there will always be a lot of tech startups who are looking for quality talent, and there will always be a lot of quality talent looking for great companies to work with. So from my perspective, and the way I encourage people in our company to think, is that we don't think about our competitors so much, right? It has to be a very problem-focused thing, and it has to be always on an absolute level of whether you are solving, whether you can truly tell yourself that you are solving the problem in the best possible fashion or not. And there's a very easy answer to it, which is that people will pay you money for it. So we feel that that has been the case. So I've never thought about Flexible on what is the unique way in which we are trying to solve their problem. Rather, it's only about being able to solve their problem in the best possible fashion, right? So that's been the approach, and that remains true till today. Of course, as I said, I have to productize more parts of it so that we can scale. But again, all those questions will never be that, okay, let's say one of our competitors is TopTal, right? So TopTal has 200 developers internally in their team who develop their product, right? So I can never benchmark myself. The total size of our team in Flexible is 20, right? And that is now 4 years into the company. So I can never benchmark myself against TopTal and say, okay, TopTal has, an amazing internal product which has a state management system and uses AI ML to be able to solve certain things in a certain fashion. That's not the way I'm going to benchmark myself with my competitor whatsoever. My question has always got to be to solve my customers' goals or problems in the best possible fashion, and then ask myself what is Flexible's business goal. So we are currently at $2 million run rate. So I want to get to a place where we reach, let's say, $5 million maybe by the end of this year. So my question will be, what are the things that I have to solve? That necessarily wouldn't lead me to say, okay, these are the 10 solutions TopTal actually implemented, so let me copy paste all 10 of them here, or let me try to do something unique here. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but because we are not a totally pure product play, but I would really encourage, again, from my limited exposure to product, that don't be too competitor focused. If you believe that you will solve your customers' problems well, go for it. After that, your product is not the only differentiating factor at all points of time. Customer service can be a differentiating factor, and I think people ignore it big time, right? Because people are so hyped up about tech that they forget that at the end of the day, those products are being used by people, right? So your goal is to not only delight people through your product, but also to delight people whenever they reach out to you. And that can be your edge also to grow. And my entire focus is that always be customer focused and not competitor focused or investor focused, right? It will make you, it will get you to the right product decisions versus benchmarking. Okay, my competitor has released 4 new features, and now I immediately need to release 10 features to stay ahead of the game. No, that's not true whatsoever. Your customers will tell you what exactly you need to be building, and if they feel that you're not building it, they'll stop paying you and they'll drop off. So that needs to be your sign, not that your competitor has built X number of features or has done so and so.
Yes. Makes sense, Karthik. Thank you so much. That was really insightful, and yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Take care.
Rohit, please ask your question.
Hi, Karthik. Hi. So I'm just trying to get around the let's say business model of Flexible. That let's say the run rate that we're talking about, 2 million, comes from the. So you're basically a marketplace that runs on a subscription basis. That is $9 per month that you're charging. So is that the only income source for the company? But this was my first question, and second question would be, so talking about your clients, if you can explain us the demographic of your clients, in a sense that where are those clients? I mean, is it from the US? Is it from India? How is it happening? That's my question.
Sure, Farhad. So the first question, it is $2 million is not the way you describe it, because ours is not a subscription model. So $2 million strictly can't be called even revenue, but that's the way we are told to report in our Indian financial statements as well. We call it revenue there. So we just started using it colloquially even on when we make our announcements and also internal benchmarking. $2 million in essence is, okay, let me first explain what the Flexible business model is. So in essence, Flexible is a freelance marketplace. We screen freelancers to get only the top quality freelancers on our platform. We also screen our company so that freelancers get to work only with the best companies possible, right? So in essence, what we then do is match a particular freelance developer or a designer with a particular tech startup or company. And so we have pre-negotiated rates with each of these freelancers. So typically these freelancers tell us that they want to charge this much. So we agree on that rate. And then we mark that rate up by a certain percentage, which is our commission. And then we charge companies. And that the difference between what we charge the company and what we have to pay the freelancers is the money we make, right? So that's the entire business model. The $2 million that we talk about is the total amount of project value done through Flexible. So the total amount of money paid to Flexible by the company is $2 million. Of course, a large portion of that goes to freelancers, and the remaining portion comes to Flexible, and that is the amount of money that we make.
So in essence, the $2 million that we talk about is basically gross merchandise value, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, we can't call it merchandise here because it's not merchandise, because that's a more e-commerce terminology. But yes, I think it is a good equivalent metric to look at. Yes, you can call it GMV. That is easier to understand. Yes, that is GMV.
Right.
So now coming to your second question, which was around the demographic, right? So initially, most of our network, as I told you, was in India. So in the first 1.5 years, almost all of our clients were based out of India. But we realized that for companies, our demographic or our better target customers would be in the US, in Europe, maybe Singapore, Australia, and so on. So that's when we had a decent amount of money coming from all the outbound efforts we had put in. So we then were able to put in more of effort into our inbound pipeline. And today, I think 60 to 70% of, or maybe even a little higher, I need to look into the numbers, of business would be outside of India. And that would be predominantly US clients. And maybe another 10-15% would be based in Europe, and the rest would be India. So that would possibly be the split. Even on freelancers, we again started initially, all our freelancers were based in India, but now we have freelancers across, 20, 25 countries. So we have freelancers also in Eastern European countries like UK, Croatia. We have it in Africa, in countries like Nigeria. We also have freelancers itself in the US, but also in Latin American countries. So yeah, now we are all across.
Karthik, earlier at Flexible, you used to offer sum of rupees 1,500 for referring friend and joining. How that scheme worked out?
Yeah, the referral is okay. I think the referral scheme was fine. And now we've increased that amount further. I don't remember what that amount is, but now we can afford a bit more. So we are offering more. Earlier we couldn't, so we offered lesser. But yeah, we get a few referrals every week, but I wouldn't say that is our biggest source from the freelancer point of view. But from the customer point of view, I think one of the major channels, close to 40% of our growth or new customers comes from customers itself. So it's either customers being a repeat client, that is that they are actually hiring one more person for their company, or it is them referring another company to hire from. So I think our focus on ensuring that our customers are always happy or on both the sides, but especially on the company side, has really helped us because they like what we do, and thereafter they recommend more people to hire from us, or they hire themselves more from us.
Okay. Likit, ask your question.
Hello, Karthik.
Hey, Likit.
I've been following Flexipile since almost a year, last March 2020. So I've been through the journey.
Thanks, Likit. Yeah.
So there are two parts in my question. So first part is related to the initial journey of the startup. And a bit background about me is I'm a non-tech guy working in aerospace company, and I have a couple of local businesses along with my job.
Okay.
And during the pandemic, I had to quit those, and now I'm preparing for the CAT, and I have a bunch of ideas why I need a MBA from top tier colleges.
Okay.
So once after the MBA is done, so your peers will be in. I mean, I align to your thoughts. I mean, my thoughts are almost aligned to yours. I want to build a tech company after my MBA. And once the MBA is done, and my peers they would have been in so and so companies, and they would have on the metrics side, on the lifestyle, they are in a much higher thing, and I might be struggling in the startup in the initial days. I hope even you would have been in that situation. How did you handle that?
Yeah. See, I think it's just a personality. There's more of internal introspection, right? Like it's about why are you starting up? For me, as I said at the very beginning of this talk, it was always about chasing happiness, right? I didn't feel happy in what I was doing at JP Morgan in the investment banking role. I didn't feel happy when I joined the MBA school, and I just saw everyone talking about placements all the time. I felt that I should try entrepreneurship, and I found a certain level of passion and happiness I could bring to work every single day. So I will not say that money is not a necessity. Of course, money is a necessity, right? We all need money. But I think life is more than that, and that has been the reason that I have been able to go through with this journey. That I believe in it. That I'm very frugal. I hardly have any expenses. I live a very frugal lifestyle. Yes, but money. I just like in investment banking, my salary was a lot, right? So I saw that earning a huge amount of money wasn't giving me happiness. So I recognized that making a lot of money is not really going to be the way I can be satisfied in life. And the moment I internalized that, it became a lot more easy for me. And also, to be very honest with you, I don't like this peer-based benchmarking of success, right? Like as in, this is what my friends are doing, or this is what society deems as success. So this is what I should achieve at a certain age. I think a lot of us fall prey to that, especially in our early age when we don't know better. But now I think all of us have grown to a certain age where we should be able to make those, I wouldn't say call those tough decisions also, but make those decisions which are more personal to you. We shouldn't make decisions which are societal focused. We need to make decisions that are driven by your own needs and your own want to be happy, right? So whether my friend earned 10 times as me or 20 times as me, frankly makes zero difference to me. I think that has been the reason why it's been easy for me to go through with this journey. Of course, I need a certain amount of money, and I always felt that throughout this journey, I would be able to make enough of money so that I don't die of hunger, or I ensure that my loved ones don't die of hunger. As long as I was confident of these two things, I felt okay, fine. It really doesn't make so much of a difference what my peers are earning or so on. So I think we all need to be a little more absolute in our benchmarks in terms of trying to get to where we want, rather than trying to get where our friends are at, or what society decides where we should be at. There needs to be a little more personal benchmarks of where we want to really be.
Okay.
Thanks. The second question is based on the demographic. So, how do you attract the clients or the freelancers from the US market or from the European markets?
Yeah, as I said, I think that was lot of the work over there was on building our inbound pipeline. So when I say inbound, we did a lot of work on search engine optimization. Like, so when we started it, if you know a little bit around SEO, so there's something called domain authority, which tells you the reputation of your website. Ours was really bad. The amount of traffic we were getting organically, it was very bad. So we had to build all of that. So we had to build authority. We had to build backlinks. We started building traffic to our website by writing quality blogs, by making them SEO optimized. I'm a big proponent of SEO because I think that's the most loyal and reliable channel that you can get for traffic and for leads. So we focused a lot on that, and that has paid off, and it has increased exponentially. Like now, I think this June, we got more than 100,000 people visiting our website. Right? So it has grown over a period of time, and we've been able to get people not only from the Indian geography, but from around the world. And that includes people from the US and many other countries as well. But also, I didn't have any, so I'm not very naturally an extrovert. I have a certain introvert side to myself. So I like to keep to myself. So I didn't have any profiles on any social network till early last year. But we realized that as a bootstrap startup, your name doesn't naturally come in TechCrunch, or it doesn't naturally become popular by itself, right? Because you raised a huge amount.
True.
So you have to be your own brand. You have to create your own brand, and you have to be your own PR person, right? So, and I didn't want to be, just because I want to make Flexible more popular, I didn't want to be dishonest in public. So I just asked myself, what is the most honest person I can be on social media? I realized that, okay, maybe I can just talk about my own experience of building Flexible, so that as an introverted person, I still can possibly do this as comfortably as possible. So that's what I do. I come talk about my experience. I try to share my lessons and so on. So I think that has also been another way which Flexible's reach has increased because of what Rishikesh has done and what I am trying to do as well.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Karthik. It was nice talking to you. And all the tweets that you put it on Twitter are insightful. It's very helpful for youngsters like us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Niket. All the best.
Last question. Porur, you can ask your question. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Karthik. This is Sasi here. I'm from Chennai.
Hey, Sasi.
My question is on B2C. So the trend right now is startups are coming up from unorganized sector to organized sector. So where do you see trend? Where do you see the next idea where the unorganized sector might get disrupted and organized? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Sasi. So actually, my knowledge on B2C is actually very bad.
Okay.
But in general, I'm not sure. Unorganized things do become organized through technology, and people do it. But I think the next big thing need not be something that disrupts things. It can just be things that do something marginally better, a little better. And typically, my outlook on startups is also that I feel that the words disrupt and revolutionize and democratize and all those kinds are very overused and possibly not used in the same in the right context. So I think startups which do well, I think possibly do something which is very commonplace, but they just do it well. I think most of the startups are like that, because you think about all the big companies, even Apple wasn't the first one to make laptops, or Facebook wasn't the first one to make a social network, and so on. Like Google wasn't the first search engine, and so on. So I don't think people come up with a breakthrough idea. They just come up with amazing execution. And this might sound like a cliche, and many people will find this very annoying, but that's my belief. So, but anyways, I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer your question. but my knowledge on B2C is also not great.
Okay. I have a second question.
Mhm.
What are some books that you recommend? Books or websites that you recommend that will help entrepreneurs?
Sure. So books, I don't read much. Non-fiction, I don't read at all. I was just mentioning at the beginning of this talk, I read only purely fiction. But websites, I think Indie Hackers is a great website. I felt, it can also be a huge time drain because you end up just reading all the time and not doing. And I felt that there was a period in between when I was doing that myself as well. But yeah, Indie Hackers is good because typically you find more people who are like-minded over there and who are also facing similar problems. So you see how people think. You're able to read, and there are more relatable people over there, right? Typically, when you go on Twitter, you just hear people talking about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and so on, right? So they are not very relatable people. They are inspiring people, but not very relatable. So I found Indie Hackers to be very useful in that aspect, that there are businesses which are small and they are trying to scale. So they are facing problems that any entrepreneur like you or me would be facing. So I found that very helpful. But more than anything, I think it has always been just doing it and making mistakes, then trying to Google possible solutions of it, then trying to implement it again, then making some more mistakes, and then just improving in that way, little by little by little. I found that way to be the best. That has worked for me personally.
Okay. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Vishal.
Cheers, Sasi.
Hopefully, listeners learn a lot from your story and insights from you. This is great, and so I think we covered all key points that Karthik touched. Anything we missed, Karthik?
No, Vishal, it was a pleasure talking to all of you. I got to interact with so many great people. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope it was helpful for helpful for all you all. And I think it is each one of you build amazing companies or work in amazing companies. And overall, remember that whatever we are trying to do is just to be a little more happy and not, try to meet external benchmarks with people. I think that is what has helped me overall in life.
Yes, Karthik, can you share any feedback for our team No Experience?
No, Vishal, I think it was great. I think I really enjoyed talking to you guys. More than anything, I really enjoyed the AMA. I typically bore myself to death when I talk. So it is nice when I'm answering specific questions which might actually help people. So I really enjoyed doing that. So thanks a lot. I would really encourage you to have more of AMAs rather than people just talking about themselves. I think it really helps when other people have very pertinent questions for themselves, and possibly people like me can help them or nudge them in a certain direction.
Yes, I'm looking forward for more Twitter spaces with you also, and someday possibly meet you offline.
Sure, Vishal, absolutely, of course.
Awesome. On that note, Karthik, it's really pleasure having you on to something huge, and we wish you very best of luck. And thank you so much for sharing your story and insight.
Cheers, Vishal. All the best to you too. Take care, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, Karthik.
Thank you, Karthik.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you guys for joining.